Hi, it's Audrey.
It's Adeline.
Welcome to our podcast, Unlikely Neighbors! Woo, first take. That's so rare. Today is actually super exciting. We have a good friend of ours who Adeline and I both know through Andrea, and her name is Gloria, and she's going to be sharing with us just a really incredible story about her family.
Gloria is one of the first few people that shared an incredible story with us when we were having brunch one day, and that's kind of what got us thinking and wanting to create a podcast because her story was so crazy, and we were like, everyone should hear this because lots of people will be able to, I feel like, maybe not relate to it, but it really brings to light a lot of things about a different part of history. So basically she shared that her dad grew up in Cambodia and then ended up moving to France kind of right before the Cambodian Genocide in the 1900s. And we just thought that the story was really cool because she ended up, her family ended up moving to Hong Kong, and that's how we know her. So we're actually very thankful that her family's story and all the choices that they made got her to actually become our friend now. And we've been so blessed by her friendship as well.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. And I think today's episode is just going to be very exciting. It's a lot of details, but I think in the details, there are some very divine things that we can hear. It's very cool to highlight every opportunity that has been offered to this family. I want to share a bit of a disclaimer before we start. This episode does feature some heavy topics. We have permission from Gloria's parents to share this story. We'll be talking about a very culturally sensitive issue, and that's the Cambodian Genocide. We want to be sensitive and aware that this event has affected many people's lives. If at any point you just don't want to listen to this episode, that's totally fine. But that's what we will be talking about today. We just want to give you a heads up that it's just a serious topic, and we do have fun in this episode, but it's going to be a little bit different than most weeks.
Yeah.
So.
I think it's cool because, we are talking about a more heavier issue, but I think what's always great about people that we invite or the stories that we talk about, there's always a bright side of things. Like Audrey mentioned, there was a lot about the opportunities and the timing of everything worked out for Gloria's dad and her family to move to France and then now move to Hong Kong and live the life that they live now. So there's always definitely a brighter side to things, but yeah, we recognize that it is a heavier topic as well.
Yeah, we're so excited for you guys to get to hear this story. It was something, like Adeline mentioned, that got us so pumped. We are so excited to get this out into the world. I think it's definitely a story that deserves to be shared because it is so incredible. Yeah, we're just excited for you to listen to it. So if you want to tune in, we'll be interviewing Gloria.
Yay!
Yeah. Good time.
Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
So, my name is Gloria. I grew up in Hong Kong. I was born in Hong Kong. My dad is from Cambodia originally, but he was fostered in France because of the war, which we'll expand on later. Mm-hmm. And then my mom grew up in Hong Kong, kind of, and then went to study in the UK and worked there. So I ended up with 3 nationalities. I have 3 passports.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I'm actually kind of excited because I feel like we haven't really had a chance to dig into these things. And actually, Gloria and I, we don't really know each other for very long. I don't know if you guys have known each other longer.
Not even, yeah. But I think it's strangely, it feels so familiar.
Yes. I feel like I knew you through high school.
Yeah. Well, I am a bit of an open book. I'm
transparent.
I'm very transparent.
Yeah. So I feel like today's episode kind of came about when we were hanging out at our Bible study, and then Gloria was sharing a bit of her background, and she was sharing how her relatives have very strong French culture, or that she speaks to her grandma. You speak to your grandma in French?
Yeah. And so, they watch French movies and stuff.
Yes. And we were like, how does that happen? It's very rare to meet an Asian family that speaks French in Hong Kong, and what is the story behind that? So she kind of dove into a bit of her story, and today we're going to dissect that. Is there anything you want to share a little bit about the background of your family, where you grew up, where your parents are from?
Mm-hmm. I grew up in Hong Kong, and so before kindergarten, I only spoke French and Canto, but then going into kindergarten ESF school, taking on that kind of British identity or whatever. I think that a lot of people actually go through this, especially with mixed cultures and stuff. When you go to the school and you English is the main language, then you kind of take that on as your identity, and
you lose the other
languages
that you had.
And it's something that I really regret because then I kind of erased, refused sometimes to speak in another language because I was like, no, I'm like British, or like, you know.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, in high school, we got detention once because the teacher heard someone in class speak Cantonese.
Yes.
And that was like, so it kind of like erased all other cultures from you.
There's no room to like have your own cultural identity at school, I feel like.
Yeah, and because of that, there would be some shame in speaking another language, or also you don't want to develop it as much, and that means that you're weaker in those languages. And especially in Cantonese, I mean a lot of people I think would be able to relate with it to this, is that when you speak Canto, you'll end up with an accent, and that gets like made fun of, especially because we like appearance wise we're like Chinese and stuff, so people are like, why don't you speak Chinese and blah blah blah. So afterwards I went to ESF schools, went to Renaissance, then Lipochen, and then went to university in London, and now I'm back in Hong Kong.
Woo!
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about like your dad. You know, he was in Cambodia. How like what was his life like there, and how did he end up moving to France?
So a lot of people would know that there was a genocide in Cambodia that started, well, there was quite a long period leading up to it, and it's quite complicated with all of the parties involved and everything that happened, as like wars and things often are. But my dad flew over to France from Cambodia in 1975, and it's actually quite crazy because I was talking to him again about this yesterday, and I didn't realize that he flew 1 month before the Khmer Rouge, like the people, the communists, that the rebels took over Phnom Penh, which is the capital of Cambodia.
Wow. How old was he?
He was 12.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, I did not realize that.
Yeah, so it took 1 year for my dad to get a passport from Cambodia. So his dad had already planned for him to go a year in advance. So it was really fortunate that he actually got out when he did.
So why did your dad's dad, so like your grandpa, plan for your dad to move? Was it already pretty bad at that time?
So at that time already, there was a lot of fighting going on, and the Khmer Rouge had like taken over many parts of Cambodia already, and the fighting was constant, and it was no surprise when they ended up taking over Phnom Penh. And basically the Americans pulled out of Cambodia. But when they pull out, it's not automatic. It's like, it took like, I don't know, maybe a year or two or so. So people already knew that they'd kind of essentially lost that battle. So it was a bit foreseen. But 1 year before my dad left, a great uncle who my dad's family didn't know of before, because it's very complicated, and like so somehow through all of his escapades there popped out this great uncle of my dad.
Popped out.
Yeah. And he found my dad's family, I guess, and they reconnected and became good friends. And so he was good friends with my grandpa, which was my dad's dad. And he had kind of done some research into, I guess, what was going on in the war and stuff. And he warned my dad that this was gonna come, and to send away some of his kids, I guess, to France, because he had sent away 2 of his sons to France, I think, and his wife. One of them because he had an accident, so for medical purposes, and the other one I think was probably to study. So they opened up a restaurant in Paris.
Why France exactly?
Yeah.
I think at the time, I mean, Cambodia had ties with France, and
so it's easier for them to move there.
yeah, and I guess he'd already sent them over there, so there would be family there for my dad and his sister to stay with.
So your dad and his brother went to France?
No, so my dad had, let me see, he had an older sister, which was the oldest child, and then it was him. So he was the oldest son, so that's why he got sent over. And then he had 2 older sisters, and then he was the oldest son, and then he's got 2 more younger sisters, and then he had 2 more younger brothers. But in the course of the genocide and all of that, his eldest sister, the oldest one, died because she got sent to a, what are those prison camp? Concentration camp. And they didn't have much food, and they had to work a lot every day, so she starved to death. And she didn't get sent over because, I guess, physically she was less strong than my dad's other older sister, and she was less able to, like, less capable of, like, adapting and, like, to figure things out, like
grit and independence,
and like be able to handle things. And like my aunt is very se débrouiller, I don't know the English term, but she's able to
figure things out. Street
smart, that's the thing.
Nice.
So, and it was a really good thing that she went with my dad, because a lot of the things that happened afterwards, like it was because of her initiation and her initiative that things got put into motion and stuff. So basically they were in Phnom Penh, which is the capital, and my grandparents, they would sell bicycle parts.
Whoa.
So back then, people didn't really have motorized vehicles, people didn't have bikes and stuff. So they were fairly well off, I guess. And yeah, they were very good at like, also like street smart and like commerce and stuff.
So would you say like moving out of Cambodia to other parts of the world, like was that a common thing then, and was it like just something reserved for more privileged people with like money?
I mean, of course, to be able to leave, you definitely have to have some privilege, because it still costs money to fly and everything. But at the time, it was, so Cambodia was like maybe second most wealthy country or something in Southeast Asia or something. I mean, it was like quite well off.
Yeah.
I mean, that was before like the revolution and everything. And everywhere in the world thought that what was going on in Cambodia was a good thing. That was a revolution for the people, by the people. That's why it took a long time for people to actually realize the atrocities that were going on, and to finally realize that there was a genocide there. And Pol Pot had come back, educated in France, inspired in France, to Cambodia and hated the West. And so they closed off Cambodia, and it was a bit like a lockdown. I mean, we all kind of have a better sense of that now, but when they first took over, they kind of locked down the city, so you couldn't go out, you wouldn't know what happened to your neighbors or other people, like your relatives and stuff, because they would evacuate like section by section the city to go out into the rural areas to work. That's why afterwards, like my dad was saying yesterday, whole families disappeared. And and you would just lose contact with them. And there's lots of like his uncles and aunts and stuff, like all of their families disappeared. And it's even crazier after you realize that a lot of Cambodians, they all marry, like even now, their cousins to keep it within the family. And the fact that all of that, like a lot of whole families were wiped out even after all of that like effort to preserve the family is insane. I guess I'll just like tell you kind of brief timeline of like what happened. So that year leading up, he ended up going with 2 of his cousins to France. So 2 more of his great uncle's children went with his sister and him to France. And there wasn't a direct flight to France from Cambodia, so they went to Bangkok, stayed one night, and then went to France. And it's crazy because he was 12 years old. His cousin was around the same age, maybe a year older or so. Then his other cousin was around the same age, and his sister was 14.
Wow.
So yeah, they
They traveled on their own.
Yeah, and he said that when they were in the airport, they had to run to the small plane because, like, bomb shells were being thrown at the airport.
Oh my gosh.
Because at the time, the Khmer Rouge were already so close to Phnom Penh, and they would, I mean, it's kind of like a scare tactic. So at that time already, he said a lot of people on his flight were foreigners, like journalists and stuff fleeing, and people from the sea. It was strategic for the Khmer Rouge to keep the airport open because they wanted all of the foreigners to leave. Yeah, so he ended up going to Bangkok, to France, and then he stayed with his aunt who was there, so his great uncle's wife who was there. And he ended up working at their restaurant in Paris as a dishwasher for a while during the summer. So he went in March of 1975, and for the first month his parents sent him money and he got like news from them. But when the Khmer Rouge took over in April 1975, like, they lost all contact.
Oh wow.
So they were literally by themselves in France.
Yeah, so it was quite, he said he was quite bored, but
That's like
Such a 12-year-old.
Yeah, but he would work in the restaurant every day except, I guess, Mondays. And he said that his sister found the Franco-Khmer Association. They would have, like, give out used clothes. So he would go and get used clothes from them, and he said he really liked that, and he'd go, especially on Mondays, because that's when the restaurant's closed.
Aww.
And every week he'd, like, go and get new, like,
So
used
cute.
clothes and stuff. Yeah, and his sister had, like, kind of, I guess that's why it's such a good thing that she was there. She had the foresight to realize that if he stayed there, he'd have no future, in that he'd just work at the restaurant for the rest of his life or whatever. Somehow or another, she was talking to the lady at the Franco-Khmer Association, and she said that there was a thing that they were doing to have Khmer children adopted or, like, taken in by French families. Because at this time, once Cambodia was taken over in 1975 in April, they instantly became refugees, because at the time the refugee status, it had a different prerequisite, because refugees meant that you didn't have a nationality, and so essentially at that point they had lost their nationality and they were refugees, so they were given refugee passports. So my aunt found my papi and mami, that's like my grandparents, my French side of the family. She found them through the program that they were doing, and she originally arranged, it was supposed to be her and my dad who went to live with them in Franche-Comté, so like the countryside. But his aunt found out, and she, probably because my aunt was a female, she didn't want her to go because they didn't know the family and stuff like that. So somehow she ended up sending her son with my dad to go be kind of taken in by that French family, this being one of the same cousins that came from Cambodia with them. So they went there in, I think, October of the same year that they arrived in France.
Really quick.
Yeah, it was really quite quick.
They're still not in school at this point, right?
They ended up joining school there. Yeah. And the whole thing with, like, my French side of the family deciding to take in these kids in the first place is, like, really quite, like, amazing too. Because they heard of what was going on, and they're very intellectual and things, so they decided, even though, like, at that time people were saying that it's a good revolution and stuff like that, they didn't really believe it. Because I think there was one journalist in Cambodia who was spreading, the truth about what was going on there. So he went with his cousin to Besançon, which is where Victor Hugo is from, if any of you know who that is. So
celebrity.
When I'll just call them papi and mami, because, like, that's my, like, French.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
The foster parents.
Yeah, French foster parents, they moved to a rural community nearby. It's a very small, like, commune.
Yeah.
And then he grew up there. But before they moved to that place, his cousin left. So my dad was now alone with them.
Okay. So from all of that, what do you think kept your family members going through all these changes and difficulty and moving to France and just adjusting and acclimating to such a different period of their life?
So when I asked my dad this, and I think it really speaks to the way that he sees life now too, is that he was like, in those times you just don't think, like, you don't overthink things, and your basic human instinct for survival takes over. So just whatever comes your way, you just, like, adapt to it and just go with the flow. So even when he didn't know where his family was, he would think about them, but his present was more, like, primary, yeah.
Yeah. I think that speaks a lot to, like, human nature as well. Like, we're a lot more resilient than we think we are, especially when we are, like, thrown into situations like we just have to be.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a lot of what you were sharing in your dad's story, your family story, a lot of about the right timing, the right opportunities. They moved to France 1 month before the genocide really hit pretty bad, right? And then they got in touch with that program that connected them with a foster family, and then the foster family happened to also be very aware of what's going on. So it just seems like a lot of things lined up in your dad's favor as well, which is really cool. Like, it's like a central theme of your entire story, like how the right opportunities, the right timing, the right people were brought into his life.
Definitely.
So from hearing the story, I know you, like, talked to your dad before coming and sharing with us today. What do you think you took away from hearing this and learning more about your family's history or their heritage with such an insane background and story? What's it like to just rehash and hear it again?
It's always been something that I've kind of known about and been interested in and wanted to get more connected to throughout my upbringing. But it was a bit hard because I think my dad's side of the family, obviously, having survived it, they don't really like to delve into it again and talk about it. So throughout my life, I've gotten snippets here and there, and I'd have to, like, piece together the pieces. So it was also in that conversation, the original conversation that we had together, where I realized, hold up, like, my family, who are all in France now, my dad's side of the family, they immigrated there. They're not, even though to me they are quintessentially French, like, and my cousins, like, all of their kids, they were born and raised in France. They're all French to the core, but they were actually, like, immigrants to the country, and they managed to assimilate so well and live out that true, like, French culture and life and identity is, like, crazy to me. Yeah.
Now, you know, you guys have moved to Hong Kong. Like, how do you think that whole French plus Hong Kong plus Cambodian culture, like, affects the way that you live your life?
It's something that I've always kind of, in a way, struggled with, because I grew up in Hong Kong, and I know that a lot of people probably have this same thing where I don't think it's necessarily fits within the strictest definition of third culture kid, but you
essentially are,
you have all of these different cultures and like traditions and identities within you, so wherever I go, like, I'll always kind of feel like a foreigner, but I'll always kind of feel like I'm at home. So it's like this dichotomy of, like, feeling at home, but at the same time feeling like I'm still on the outskirts of, like, the main culture and everything.
Yeah, my friends and I talk about this all the time. Like, we're, like, citizens of the globe, because you can't fully relate to the Hong Kong experience or the Cambodian experience or the French experience, but it's like all of those things mesh into who you are and make up your identity.
Exactly.
And then added to that, like what you were saying in the beginning, being from an international school, it's, like, so different from, like, if you went to another school. All of these things have made up, like, your cultural identity as well. So it's like you're perpetually a foreigner, but you're also always at home as well.
Yeah. So when I'm in Hong Kong, I'll miss, like, France and London and, like, I mean, not necessarily Cambodia, because I've been back twice only, but when I'm in each city, I'll miss the other countries, but I'll also feel at home. So it's like really strange.
Yeah.
I know you had mentioned before that you get to watch French TV with your grandma. Are there other things that you feel like enhance like your life?
It's like strange because of the way that I live, my lifestyle, the way that I see things is very east and west. So like food wise, I love I love like French food and stuff. Like that was like actually the main type of food that I would say that I liked most. Until like when I left Hong Kong, then I suddenly grew this like craving and like appreciation for like Hong Kong food and like Asian food. So I mean, in food itself, it kind of manifests. I love both sides.
Yeah.
I mean, it also ties into our upbringing in an international school, and I guess, like, for example, now with the politics and everything of the situation, you'll also be able to see both sides more and feel more of a tie. Like, things are more personal on both ends.
Yes.
So it's not just, like...
Black and white.
Black and white, yeah. So you'll have empathy on both sides. And you'll kind of feel on the fence about a lot of things,
Yeah.
I think.
It's a lot of mixed feelings when it comes to like things that could be dividing.
Definitely.
I think even like when we went to college in the US, it's like you learn so much about a different culture and their political issues as well. And you are able to see both sides. And then when you come back home, you're able to see like, okay, like what are some good things about this culture? And like what are some values that they hold that is good? And how can, like, you get to see a more well-rounded, like global picture of the world, I guess.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's helpful too, because you probably have people in your community who give input from very different backgrounds. So like, let's say we're not even considering one side of something. You have like your French family to be like, oh, I have input from like this type of perspective, or you have like your friends from your international school from, I'm sure, other backgrounds too who give input. Yeah.
And it's like quite interesting to like just how different their takes on things can be. Even in picking a university course or whatever, like for the Asian side, they're like, oh, like you have to like go through with it and like finish it and whatever. And with the French side, it's like, oh, how are you like enjoying it? And like, oh, if you don't enjoy it, like even though you're 2 out of 3 years in, hey, maybe you can like think of changing majors. And
so foreign to Asian culture.
And to the like Asian culture, it's like, what? How can you do that? Like, how can you waste your money and things like that? So
I think even what you said about your dad and like his response to the question about like how did he go through it, right? Like it's like it just shows a lot about how like his experience colors his experience now. It's like he has so much grit that we don't have because our experience has been so privileged compared to his.
Just to kind of touch back on your dad's story. So what happened to your family that was still in Cambodia, and how did your dad end up, and how did you, I guess, end up being in Hong Kong?
So for those few years, my grandpa was killed because a lot of the men were killed at that time, and then the youngest child died because he got sick and they couldn't get medication, and like I said, the eldest sister also died. So my grandma was now widowed, which in Cambodian society that puts you at a very low status. So she ended up having to, because she's also quite a go-getter and quite savvy, she ended up doing some rice commerce thing where she would like cycle between villages and sell rice.
Whoa.
Yeah, so my dad said that when he saw her again, she had massive quads and like from cycling with like 50 kg bags of rice.
Wow.
And basically there was a move in the politics and the people who were in power. A lot of people took that opportunity to escape. So she escaped to Thailand, and there was a camp in Thailand where they stayed for 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
But through all the regime changes and everything, she had kept this photo of their family with their names. So when she arrived at the camp, she gave it to a Belgian journalist, and she said, "Find my family."
Wow.
And so he, through his contacts, he found my aunt in Paris, and that's
crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. So they got in touch. But it was another like 2 to 3 years before they actually moved to Paris and were reunited.
This is like all before smartphones,
Yes.
emails and stuff. So
Yeah.
it's like if you lose touch with them, it's so hard to
Yeah.
find
Yeah.
them again because
Yeah,
you don't
they
have their
didn't-
address.
And at the time, my dad said this too, like, when the numbers came out of the people who had perished in Cambodia, like around a quarter of the population were killed off. So he was like, if my family survived this, that would be insane. So he knew the chances of them being alive were slim.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But when he saw his mom again, he didn't recognize her. And
Wow.
he took the train to go see them in Paris, and on the way he shared with this lady on the train, like, I haven't seen my family in so long and I don't know if I'll recognize them, and I don't know how to feel about it because, like, I've lived this whole other life here in France. And he struggled a lot with his identity as Cambodian or French for all this time. When he saw his mom, it was like seeing a stranger, he said.
Wow.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
Because he left when he was 12.
Yeah.
When was this? Like, how old was he when he met his mom again?
He was reunited in 1981, so that's 6 years later, so he was about 18 or 19.
Wow.
It's like his formative years as
Yes.
well.
Yeah.
And so much changed in that time. Like, his mom became a widow and all of that.
And he had to, like, put on, like, a whole other cultural identity. He had to
Yeah.
learn, like, a new language, live with a whole different type of people.
Exactly. It was quite crazy.
So what would you say is significant to you about this story in your family?
I think it really, it's also relevant to your whole podcast in general, like Unlikely Neighbors, how insane it is that people and where you come from, like people around you, like the crazy things that they've lived through, and how even through all of that, like you can end up in a place like we are now and like together in this room. And really the crazy like orchestration and timing of every event that has happened and every event that my family has gone through to allow me to end up being here. Like, I benefit so much from all of the strength that they had and all of the decisions they made, which allow me, like, gift me to, I've literally done none of this. Like, I didn't have any of their grit, I didn't go through any of their pain, but I'm able to live a better life because of what they've gone through.
Wow. Yeah.
It really humbles you, too.
Yeah, that's totally how I feel. I feel, like, so, like, in awe and, like, respect of your dad. To be able to survive that. Yeah.
Yeah, I have so much respect for them, and the more I learn about each and every one of their stories and everything that they've gone through, like, it's so humbling.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I think I'm proud of what they've gone through, as in how they've managed to overcome it all and end up being contributing members of society wherever they are.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
I think maybe just to wrap up, what do you think listeners can take away from your family's story?
I guess when I see what they've gone through, I think this is something that my dad's take on everything too, is the importance of like adaptability and not like overthinking everything, because especially for our generation, I guess, we are so prone to think about all of the ramifications of everything and how we're feeling and everything, and I do this too. But sometimes you kind of just have to go with the flow and like adapt to what life gives you and just power through.
Yes.
And it's cool to see that, like, your family is a product of your dad, like, powering through and, like,
Yeah.
grit. And, like, we're so blessed by being able to be friends with you.
Yes. It's
Very
crazy
cool.
thinking we, like, would not be together here right now if your family hadn't made those decisions that they did. I mean, you touched on that, but I think it's just kind of cool how we can still, like, see that orchestration and feel like me and Adeline benefit from all those things. The timing of, like, your dad being able to, like, come to Hong Kong, go to France, all those kinds of things. We are reaping the results of all that. So, very cool to reflect on. I love it.
Thanks for joining us on the podcast. We loved having Gloria as the guest on our 3rd episode. Her story is so unique and honestly nothing like we've ever heard. And as we mentioned at the beginning of our episode, you know, there's a lot of cool themes that we see from what she shared about like the timing of everything and the opportunities. So Audrey, what do you think your takeaway is from her whole story?
I mentioned before, I just felt very like in awe of what her family was able to go through. I definitely feel like there's so much I think I can't accomplish or can't push through because it just seems so hard to just take every day, every problem as it comes. And I definitely think Gloria's dad did that. Something else I think we're just kind of seeing a theme tie in is right now we've been reading through this book called Esther. And it highlights similar things, I think, to what Gloria's story highlights, which is just very insane divine appointments, very cool opportunities that just open doors to things you think you would never experience. And it really shows, I think, the importance of how life really turns out in ways we don't expect. And even in all that, there's still unity in family. There's still, I would say resolution is maybe the word that I see, that there was resolution for her family and just a very strong sense of coming together at the end of the day. Like they were split up across countries and they were able to just be reunited and in such a crazy circumstance. So I think just thinking of that, it's wild to even know Gloria now. We touched on that earlier, but I think just having the chance to know Gloria and hear the story, I'm like, whoa, what are the chances that this story was able to like reach my ears and hear all of that? Yeah, so I think it's just humbling to hear, and it's very inspiring.
I think similar as well, like seeing how everything worked out, like to be so many miles away from home, to learn a whole new language, a whole culture, and then not know where your family is and suddenly be reunited 6 years later is insane. And, you know, still being in contact now and still learning bits about how her family or how her dad, you know, got connected back with her other family members is really cool as well. I think I really like what Gloria shared at the beginning as well about like culture and finding her identity. I think her dad was struggling to find his identity between like Cambodia and French. Gloria as well, like going to an international school, growing up speaking Cantonese and French, and then being in an international school that only allowed her to speak English. I think I really resonated with that as well. I actually, you know, did a research paper on this in college about like subtractive bilingualism, which is, you know, when people learn a new language and start to be bilingual, most of the time one of the languages, you know, you lose out on as well. So I think I definitely am a product of this as well. And I'd love to do an episode about third culture kids and this phenomenon that a lot of our friends identify as well, just because we grow up with such a culturally rich background and meet so many of these people who are struggling with something that might be more unique to a smaller population of people.
Yeah, I think something else I kind of recognized that we talked on a bit was it's almost like the small decisions we make have such a significant impact. Like Gloria's dad, I think, choosing to learn French, I think the chance that he was adopted into this, well, not technically adopted, but taken in by this French family, that affected her life, her identity, the roots of their family and their heritage. It affected so much. And I think day to day as we do things, we don't necessarily think, oh, this decision is going to affect me 10, 20 years in the future. I don't even think about, oh, this is going to affect my kids, because that's not even like on my mind right now. But those decisions that her father made affected Gloria's life forever. And I don't think it's a place to be anxious about decisions, but I think it definitely gives value to life, realizing the things we do have an impact, whether or not we see it or understand it right now. There is such a longevity to the things that we are creating and building and deciding today. So I think that's just a cool thing that I also saw.
Like living intentionally, I think even during this COVID time, it's like it really brings to light that we have to be intentional with the way that we're living. And when we slowly transition back to normal, like what parts of normal do we want to, you know, assimilate back into? I think also like just Gloria's story really challenges me as well. Like if I don't think I can be able to tell you about like my family background. So I think it's cool, like, you know, if you've never heard the story of your own heritage, your own family, like it's good to also like talk to them if you can and ask them what their experiences are like, because I think there's a lot of lessons that you can learn through that. Yeah, I think that's a great action step. Like if you just have a family member maybe you haven't talked to or called in a while, if your grandparents are still alive, they have such interesting stories. I think I forget
the richness of like my heritage and my family's life and like their livelihood and where I come from. So if your family is still alive, or maybe you have a close friend or someone who is like an older mentor, ask them what their life was like years ago, where they came from, all these things. I think the stories will really surprise you. It's definitely surprised me whenever I've been challenged to do this, and I think it's really opened up just unique connection to my own family members too. Yeah. Something else we want to mention today. In this last week, news about Ahmaud Arbery. He was murdered, and we just want to take a moment to highlight and recognize his death, to honor his family. So we're going to do 30 seconds of silence just to recognize and acknowledge what's happening. Is there anything you want to add, Adeline?
Yeah, I think what really touched our hearts about his story is that he was actually killed by 2 white men in Georgia in February. And it's currently May.
Yeah.
So it's taken like 2.5 months for his story to come out into public, and it's only because someone released a video of it. So I think, we've heard, even in college, we've heard so many different instances of injustices happening, and so it's crazy to think that we're still living in a world like that. And I mean, personally, I can speak for both of us, like I don't want to see a video of that, but if it's just sad to think that we live in a world that does
where these things occur. I think something Adeline and I both value, sharing stories that are different than ours and learning the experiences of people that are different than ours. And I think Ahmaud's story is something that I probably will never experience or relate to, and we understand it is very sensitive, I think, politically and personally, into different communities around the world, but we definitely think it's worth recognizing. We want to use our platform for people to share their voice and not just us and our opinion. So we're going to take 30 seconds of silence just to honor him. Okay, thanks for doing that with us. If you want to learn more about Ahmaud's story, we encourage you just look up his name online. I'm sure you've probably seen it on social media as well, but there's a lot to be understood there. There's a lot more to learn, and I'm sure in the future more will be released about what's happened and currently happening.
And you can also take part in solidarity with him. I think there's a lot of like runs going on. You can also reach out to like local government, things like that as well, just to bring to light more of this situation.
Yeah, I think that's good. We know this episode was definitely very different than how we normally host things, but I definitely think everything we've touched on, I think, was worth saying and worth mentioning. We look forward to upcoming episode being different and something on a different tone. So yeah, if you want, you can go find us on social media. We are on Instagram, we're on YouTube. Feel free to try out our other platforms if you prefer using Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, any of those. If you want, you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and feel free to share us with your friends.
Thanks for having us!
Woohoo!